I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands, the only show where you need a granite chin in order to listen to the end. Headgear and mouthguard are both recommended. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is my intrepid, dauntless, trustworthy, doctoral co-host, Dr. Patrick Wyman. And today we are getting to basically all of the most delicious morsels of UFC 213 and the Tough 24 finale that we have not already covered on last week's episode. If you didn't hear last week's show, go back and check it out. We did some of the big fights. In fact, probably the one that I'm most excited for this weekend we covered on that show, and that'd be the interim middleweight title fight between Yoel Romero and Robert Whittaker. We also talked about the upcoming UFC debut of Justin Gaethje versus Michael Johnson and other stuff. So go check that out. As for today, what do we got on the docket, Pat? We have the main event of UFC 213, women's bantamweight title fight between Amanda Nunes, who seems to be developing a bit of a stranglehold on a division that was kind of chaotic after the downfall of Ronda Rousey. She is fighting a rematch in her second title defense against Valentina Shevchenko, who had a very interesting contest with her 2 years ago. Then we've also got Fabricio Verdum and Alistair Overeem, two legends of heavyweight MMA, meeting for the third time in a matchup that has always been just slightly weird because it has these two guys taking part in it. So that one should be interesting as well. In our final segment, we are going to talk about Mark Diakiese, who's actually fighting this Friday on the Tough 24 finale, and we're also going to talk about Curtis Blades, who has taken the slot that should have belonged to Robbie Lawler versus Donald Cerrone on the UFC 213 main card.
We just can't ever mention that fight until it actually happens. Yeah. Because it's like smoke. If you try and grab it, it just disappears. Yeah.
It slips right through our fingers every single time. It's like it's a Ferguson Nurmagomedov type thing. I don't know. Yeah, it's a heartbreaker.
I mean, that sucks because you can't get yourself. Most of enjoying a fight is actually the anticipation of it happening. I think most of it, like a vacation too, same deal. Most of the enjoyment is actually in the thinking about it before it happens. And how can you enjoy those fights if you can't properly anticipate them because you have zero guarantee that they're ever going to happen?
Right. Catharsis is the dam breaking, and you need to have the water build up before the dam breaking means anything, you know?
That's exactly it.
Got to be some pressure there. Yeah, so someday. Fortunately, we have plenty of other fantastic fights in this card. Before we get into it, though, Pat, how are you? We're recording this on the 4th of July, America's Day of Independence. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm really good.
We are really not in the spirit of the holiday. We are both applying ourselves to work. Neither, however, was the police officer who gave me a speeding ticket on my way to this session. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Let's go ahead.
Did it end well? Because you got a ticket. I don't think that ended well.
Well, I was white, so I didn't get anything too bad happen to me, fortunately.
Yeah, that's true.
I was fortunate enough to be white at the time of the incident.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get into the main event. Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko. Obviously, a title fight means something. Nunes has been very exciting. But the reasons that this is such a compelling matchup is that we have one to look at already. We have their first fight to look back to. And the way that fight played out suggests that this one, which could last up to 5 rounds, could be very, very interesting and could indeed be a tale of two different fights. That's kind of how the first one played out. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'm a little puzzled by what seems to be a fairly pervasive belief that Shevchenko, if she can, Shevchenko, as soon as the fight hits round 3, is hers to lose.
Yeah.
Or that the fight will get there in the first place. I think it's easy to forget if you haven't rewatched that fight recently that Amanda Nunes beat the ever-living shit out of Shevchenko in the first 2 rounds of that, or in the first, especially in the second round. She was awarded a 10-8 round by practically everybody who was watching that
second
fight.
Round, she came very close to finishing via submission. She landed some devastating shots from top position. The ground and pound's always been like a secret weapon in the back pocket of Amanda Nunes.
It's easily Nunes' best skill set. If she can get on top of Valentina Shevchenko, I don't think Shevchenko survives this time. Like,
really?
it was a miracle that Shevchenko survived the first time.
Yeah, I think so. So we're looking at this matchup. Last time, just so everyone's up on their history, basically, what happened is they had a fairly close first round in which Nunes started to seize the momentum in like the last 2 minutes of it, landed some big shots, mostly after having taken Shevchenko down. That's where she got most of her good damage off. Second round, she scored a lot of kicks on the feet, got Shevchenko down again, and then did a lot of damage on the ground and almost submitted her. Third round, Nunes' gas tank was empty. She was tired. She was sluggish. She basically had to take the round off. I'm not sure she really could have done much to stay competitive. And Shevchenko pieced her up, but also struggled, I think, to put her foot on the gas the way somebody like, Amanda Nunes would have. She was kind of locked into her counterpunching style. Now, to me, that does mean that with 2 more rounds potentially to work with, Shevchenko could really build down the stretch if she can get to that third round. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how Amanda Nunes might alter her approach in this rematch. If you think she'll do the same thing with just greater success or more ferocity, or do you think she will have that first fight in the back of her mind and do something a little differently here?
So what I think is the Nunes who has shown up in the last 2 fights is much better than the Nunes who fought Shevchenko. I think Nunes burned a lot of unnecessary energy in the first 2 rounds of that fight. I think she was a little bit nervous on the feet. She was a little bit herky-jerky. She moved a lot more than she had to and threw in a lot more big explosive movements than she had to. Like, there was one that came to mind where she threw like a dumbass wheel kick for no especially good reason. Like, that's a substantial amount of energy to burn for absolutely no return on your investment. And there were a lot of moments like that in terms of her footwork. The biggest difference in watching Nunes in her last 2 fights is how much more efficient she is when she's moving on the feet. Like, she still burns energy in huge chunks when she decides to do something. Like when she comes in with a flurry, when she sets up a counter combination, when she smells blood, like, Nunes is still going to throw out a lot of energy there. But that's not unnecessary energy. That is return on your investment energy. And like, if Miesha Tate had somehow managed to make it through Nunes' flurry in the first round of their fight, just before she got rear naked choked and finished, like, Miesha Tate would have been broken for the rest of the fight anyway. If Rousey had somehow managed to survive that flurry that Nunes put on her, Rousey still would have been broken. Like, and there was still a chance that Nunes could have recovered her gas after that. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, so she got something for it. That was not the case in the first round with a lot of the energy that she burned against Shevchenko.
Yeah, she actually got very little done in the first round for the most of it. There was a lot of just kind of empty movement going on. You and I have had, I think, differing opinions on Amanda Nunes in the past. I think we had a discussion around the time, when was it, like in 2015? Maybe just after the Zingano fight or just before then. She basically said she would be switching to fighting full-time. She was going to really dedicate herself and be a fully fledged professional mixed martial artist. And the hope of, your hope, and I think the hope of a lot of people who've been watching Amanda Nunes and seeing how dangerous and explosive and athletic she is, were hoping that would resolve her issues with gassing late in fights. And I think you and I both agree to an extent, Pat, that she's always going to be a fighter for whom, like, energy management is going to be a priority. She's always going to have to think about it because she's very explosive and she doesn't like to do things lightly. She likes to go with killer intent when she strikes. And I think we probably would also agree that much like Conor McGregor did in the Nate Diaz rematch, just being more efficient in choosing her tactics more wisely and tightening up her technique, relying more on fundamentals, is going to make her a much better burst fighter. That gives her more longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't disagree with any of that. Like, I don't expect Amanda Nunes to come out and fight fresh, throwing 15 or 20 strikes a minute for 5 rounds. That she's not going to turn into Ioane and Jacek. She's
never going to be able to. She just doesn't have the build or the mindset for it. She's always going to be like a big power counterpuncher, big powerful pot shots, sparing shots, but lots of impact when they land.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that she can learn is not just when to throw a shot, but when not to throw a shot.
Sure.
Right? Like, just because you see an opening there doesn't mean you need to throw an 8-punch flurry of power punches.
Right.
Like, And that is absolutely something that she can learn. I don't like there are going to be limits to what her gas tank can accomplish. I think we can all kind of agree to that.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's where we would diverge, but maybe we just have different interpretations of really the exact same evidence. To me, I thought Nunes still looked, in that fight with Shevchenko, she still gassed pretty badly. And it looked like somebody who made an effort, but
who said she didn't gas?
Right, but the thing is your point is, because of the inefficiency, and she's gotten rid of that. I'm not yet convinced that Amanda Nunes is ever going to be a very good fighter in the third round. You know what I mean? I'm not sure that she has. The reason for that is I think her technique was better in that Shevchenko fight. After the Shevchenko fight, rather, she polished up her technique. She's now choosing her strikes a little more carefully, I think. But I think those are kind of band-aids to the essential problem, which is that when given the opportunity to waste energy, I have always seen Amanda Nunes bite on and hold on, with all of her might. I have always seen her willingly pour energy into what appears to be a viable opening. And while I suspect that Nunes will come into this fight with a more efficient, more cautious approach in the first round, and I know that Shevchenko will be very withdrawn and very cautious for the first half of the fight, I assume, I'm not convinced that Amanda Nunes can have Shevchenko standing in front of her, waiting for very long before she decides to start attacking. And while that can be bad news for Shevchenko, if she doesn't finish Shevchenko as she did in the first fight, I think she may very well end up in the same position she found herself in last time.
Okay, so I have two responses to that.
Okay.
First, that there are ways to attack Shevchenko and lead against Shevchenko without burning an enormous amount of energy. She can do that better than she did the first time. Are we in agreement on that?
Yeah, I think she will. I think that she may still reach a breaking point, but I think she'll probably take a little longer.
That's not what I asked. I asked, is it possible to fight her more efficiently than she did the first time?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, why are we all convinced that Shevchenko will make it through that? That's like, what makes you think that if she can get Shevchenko down like she did the first time? Shevchenko got taken down by Juliana Pena and spent a substantial amount of time with Juliana Pena on top of her, who is not as good a clinch wrestler and is not as dangerous on top as Amanda Nunes is, right? Both of those things are true. Like, if that's the case, why is it necessarily a given that Shevchenko survives that?
No, it's not. It's not. I'm just you got to play the odds, right? It's absolutely not a given.
But I think that the line of reasoning that's like, well, Shevchenko just has to wait until she gasses, ignores the fact that Amanda Nunes is really, really good at finishing you in the first two rounds. Shevchenko is a slow starter. Like, Nunes could gas hard in a round, and Shevchenko could still not be able to exploit it. That to me has always been the problem with Valentina Shevchenko.
Yeah, we agree. I mean, she's very, very tied to her, like, wait and see, wait for an opening. She gets a little too anxious waiting for the perfect punch and doesn't attack the myriad of opportunities that most opponents do give her.
Yeah, I mean, Shevchenko has done better with that, especially in the Holly Holm fight. As the rounds went on, she did a much better job of actually letting her shots go and attacking, but that was still against an opponent who was really willing to engage. And I think Nunes gets a little I don't think Nunes gets quite enough credit for doing a pretty good job of picking and choosing where she's going to engage on the feet. Like, if instead of, like, let's engage in a hypothetical here where Nunes doesn't take Shevchenko down in the second round and doesn't burn all that energy trying to finish her on the mat. Nunes was still winning that round on the feet. When she exchanged with Shevchenko, she was landing the better, harder shots. She was landing more of them, and she was landing cleaner shots. So let's say she doesn't take her down. She doesn't burn all that energy. She doesn't get to her back. None of that happens. Why is it a given in that hypothetical third round that Shevchenko would take it on the feet?
Well, it's certainly not a given. Yeah, here's why I think that it's not just that Amanda Nunes gasses. There's also a pattern throughout her MMA career of Valentina Shevchenko getting better as her fights go on. You said yourself she had more success, especially later in the fight against Holly Holm. She was picking off basically every opening that Holly gave her, and Holly was not particularly eager to give her openings as that fight went on. She did the same thing against Nunes. She did the same thing against Pena. I think the one against Nunes really stands out because, yes, we had Amanda getting tired, but we also had Shevchenko countering the things that had been working well against her in the first 2 rounds. We saw her thwarting the attacks that Nunes was trying. She instantly reversed a takedown attempt. She stopped several more with clinch knees and short shots, and got a little more aggressive. So while we both know that, Shevchenko is not the best opportunist in the world, that she's not going to seize an opportunity with anything close to the ferocity or the impact that Amanda Nunes can, she does sharpen up as the fight goes on. And I think that is a particularly dangerous ability to have, to be a good reader of intentions, to think well on the fly, and to make the right decisions, sort of being a flowchart fighter. That's very effective when you're facing somebody who has a really consistent history of fading down the stretch.
Shevchenko is a 5-round fighter. She was not built for 3-round fights.
Yeah, she's not impactful enough for 3-round fights.
Yeah, that's just not really her game. She really depends on having enough time to pick out your tendencies and whatnot as the fight goes on.
Yeah. What
I wonder in this matchup is A, whether she survives Nunes early, and B, whether she can muster enough offense, even in the first 3 rounds, against somebody who isn't going to give her opportunities willy-nilly.
Sure.
Like, that's the thing that Nunes, it's really easy to listen to us talk about her, to kind of give the sense that she's some sort of wild brawler who just empties her gas tank winging hooks. That's not what Nunes does. Nunes is really kind of an aggressive counterpuncher. She wants to stalk you. She wants to land, or at least that's what she's done in her last 2 fights. And that seems to be kind of her evolving game. Like, she used to be kind of a generic boxer puncher type, who didn't really have a particular specialty. And now I think she has moved much more toward, she wants to stick her jab in your face. She wants to pressure you. And then she wants to create opportunities off of that to exchange and land combinations.
Yeah, there's a reason, I think, why she had trouble getting going against Shevchenko in the first fight. Because even though she had, a fighter in front of her who wasn't doing anything, and she probably could have hit her more, the opportunities were not certain. Like Shevchenko was cautious. Amanda Nunes is a fighter who thinks. She's not just a crude brawler.
Yeah, and so I think that means that in this fight, she really has to pressure Shevchenko. She has to get her to the fence if she wants to make that work. Mm-hmm. Because you can't do that against Shevchenko in open space because her command of distance is too good, right? Like, if you give Shevchenko all the space in the world to move back, she's going to gauge your timing and gauge your distance and just dart out of the way when you try and throw something at her. Yeah. That's what she did against Holly Holm. Either she's going to dart out of the way, she's going to counter, or if she happens to be too close, then she's going to step in and smother you in the clinch.
Yeah.
Those are Shevchenko's 3 things. With her back to the fence, she can't really counter because she's too small, and she doesn't want to be in a slugging match against somebody who's 3 inches taller and probably 25 pounds heavier. Like, she doesn't want to do that. If she clinches, Nunes is much bigger, is probably as technical, and maybe not quite as technical, but still pretty dang technical in the clinch. Maybe a better pure clinch wrestler, and
certainly stronger.
And those are bad options. That's just a bad menu of options to have at your disposal if you're going to be if you're backed up to the fence. So it's not impossible to back Shevchenko to the fence either. That's a kind of an important caveat.
She does so little that you really she allows her opponent, if she has an assertive woman standing in front of her, she will give her ample opportunities to control the pace and the intensity and the distance and the location of the fight, just by not doing anything. She is too much of a counterpuncher. I will say that. Shevchenko is very good at what she does, but really crafty, top-notch counter fighters throughout history, they're marked out usually by how well they create opportunities for counters. And Shevchenko really needs her opponent to make mistakes, I think, or to have glaring flaws in their typical tactics for her to find consistent openings. And so really, I think, while this doesn't necessarily embolden me to pick Amanda Nunes, I do think that you could say about this matchup that to win, Valentina Shevchenko probably needs Amanda Nunes to gas. Like, if Amanda Nunes does not get really tired and just suddenly shut down at some point, Shevchenko's probably going to have a really hard time beating her in any phase, because Nunes is a very technical fighter who also controls the distance well. And, like in their first fight, she had a lot of difficulty getting into the pocket, so she just decided to keep kicking range when she was on the feet. And she just kicked Shevchenko in the body and legs a bunch in round 2 before finally finding the takedown. It's not as if she is just going to go crazy and make some mistake, when she still has the physical wherewithal to fight to the best of her abilities. She's sharp. She's technical. She knows what she's doing. So I'm not sure that Shevchenko is really... Technically, she might be even a little better than Nunes, but is she strategically capable of forcing her fight on Nunes if Nunes doesn't collapse at some point? I don't think she is.
Yeah, that really is something that bothers me here. So I think that there are a couple of differences in the way that you and I are looking at the fight. And I think the big one is it inevitable that Nunes gasses?
Right.
I don't think it's inevitable that Nunes gasses. I think that she's not a favorite to win a 4th or a 5th round, but I think she could win 3 if she needed to. Sure. And I think she could survive 2 rounds against somebody who really struggles to go after an opponent who's hurt. Like, she's not going to, I don't think that she's going to get a more gassed Nunes than we saw in the 3rd round of their last fight, and she still couldn't finish her.
Yeah, where I would hesitate to say inevitable, I have yet to see evidence that really proves to me that Nunes can avoid that same pitfall. Because, yeah, her technique is getting more efficient. She's getting better. I love to see the improvements that she's making. Reminds me a lot of what we've seen Cyborg go through the last few years. Like, yeah, she still gets a lot of credit for being a physical dynamo, but it's time to start looking at her kickboxing technique and her wrestling and really appreciate the quality of her skills. But, again, I think it's a Band-Aid. Like, I think that's something that, if I'm just better conditioned, then I won't gas. Well, then what's going to happen if you enter a fight with that in your mind? That's your mantra. Like, I won't gas this time. I won't gas this time. What happens to you when you do gas anyway? Like, what has Nunes ever learned to fight tired? So if she does gas, can she continue fighting? I haven't seen her have that McGregor-Diaz 2 moment where she's clearly broken physically and then she's okay with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She kind of falls apart whenever she does get tired.
I mean, yeah, okay. We're not going to agree on this. So
I'm interested to hear what evidence you've seen that makes you think that's not going to happen.
What says to you that she fell apart against Shevchenko? She survived a 3rd round.
She did nothing but survive
through it. Yeah, but she survived. Did she win the fight?
She did not.
She won a 29-27 decision against somebody who was a fairly difficult stylistic matchup for her. Almost took her head clean off in the 2nd round and almost finished her with a rear naked choke.
Yeah, now she's got 2 more rounds after that. What would you, if there had been just 1 more round after that 3rd, what would you have expected to see from Nunes? Would you have expected a different?
Probably Nunes surviving and Shevchenko doing jack shit.
Okay. And then what about a 5th round?
Doing relatively little.
And what about a 5th round?
I don't know. What about a 5th round? What about a 2nd round in which, so
the question is if Nunes, Shevchenko gets to the point that Nunes does gas, what does Nunes do to actually win some of those rounds? Can she? You know what I mean?
Get your gas back. Get back to the stool.
I've never seen her do it.
Don't shoot stupid takedowns if you don't need to.
Yeah, I don't think it's impossible. I've just never seen her do it. That's why I worry.
Yeah, I mean, in your hypothetical where there's a 4th round here, I don't understand why your hypothetical where there's a 4th round here matters more than my hypothetical where in the 2nd round Shevchenko has to gut through getting her face smashed and her head almost choked off. These are not like.
I don't think they're mutual. Yeah, I think that is an extremely likely option. I just slightly prefer my version. I think yours is.
Of course you prefer your version. That's the whole point of version.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to deny Shevchenko got her ass whooped in that 2nd round of their first fight, and that could very well have been a sequence that led to a stoppage. And if that happens again,
this narrative has literally been going since a minute into the 3rd round of that fight. Like, what if this was 5 rounds? Well, it's a given that Shevchenko wins a 5-round fight because people forget that it's a miracle that Shevchenko survived the 2nd round as it was.
Well, a miracle. I mean, she gutted it out. She wasn't like she wasn't dead in the water.
This is such horseshit. Like Shevchenko, she's so tough. She gutted out the 2nd round. Nunes gutted out a third round where she had no gas left after 10-8ing her.
Yeah, we agree.
In the second round.
We agree.
Like, that's like, there's a ridiculous double standard here. And
I'm
Nunes, like, Nunes has managed to become a villain, which is great. Like, that's great for her career, that people are invested in Amanda Nunes being the bad guy. And Shevchenko has managed to come off as the good guy here, and that affects people's analysis of this. Shevchenko gets credit for beating a kind of a faded Holly Holm, who had no real plan and had no real way of getting after her. Shevchenko gets credit for not finishing Nunes in a third round where Nunes had nothing left. Like, Nunes gets no credit for destroying two champions in under 6 minutes. Like, this is, I mean, we have gotten to the point where this is ridiculous.
I think you may be lumping me with some other fans who don't exactly share my style of analysis. I like Amanda Nunes a lot. I don't think she's a villain, and I find her to be more charming and more interesting to watch than Valentina Shevchenko. I just think that I have, until I see her defy the outcome of the, until I see her face the same circumstances that she faced in that Shevchenko fight, and overcome them, like actually win a round after reaching that point where she gasses. And for other fighters, I wouldn't worry so much, but it's incontrovertibly true that Amanda Nunes has, in all of her losses, basically suffered the same fate. She has a little too much of that Anthony Johnson thing going on, where when it does fall apart, it really falls apart. And that if it's like late in the second round or start of the third, that's when she's going to run into trouble. And I definitely think she's got a better base that she's working from now. Like she's better equipped to face that problem, but I still haven't seen her face it. You know what I mean? So if she doesn't knock Valentina Shevchenko out, if she doesn't submit her in that second or third round, even if she can go until like midway through the third before tiring, and it is possible that she could go all the way through that. She could come out and look just marvelously disciplined and just make Shevchenko lose a slow fight, because Shevchenko's not going to do a great job of pushing the pace. But if something happens, if an opportunity rears its head and Nunes cannot get the finish, which is what happened in the first fight, then I think she's probably in for 2 to 3 really nasty one-sided rounds. You know what I mean? Because at least when Shevchenko is working to survive, she's still making Nunes work. What is Nunes doing to Shevchenko once the fight becomes hers? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there are basically two potential outcomes here that are far more likely than all the others, and that's that Shevchenko wins a 5-round decision after taking the last 3 rounds, or Nunes finishes her at some point in the first 10 minutes of the fight. And everything else, like what we're arguing about, is basically around the edges of that. Like, I think that there is a chance. Like the reason that I'm in on this is because I think that there is a chance that Nunes manages to find a way to get in control of the fight in the first few rounds, doesn't drain her gas tank. Like think Anthony Johnson versus Phil Davis. That was a great example of a fight where an aggressive fighter with a limited gas tank and who definitely breaks mentally, managed to find a way to stay confident the whole fight. Yeah. Managed to find ways to pick and choose his spots, and now maybe there's an extent to which in hindsight, that was basically the only time that Anthony Johnson, wasn't the only time, but it was one of very few times where Johnson was able to do that. He did it against Andrei Arlovsky too. He did it against Dave Branch when they fought, but like that was not the usual Anthony Johnson. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's out of the question that Nunes could also do that. That Nunes could find ways to pick and choose the right shots, to land her kicks, to not go wild looking for a finish, to not get discouraged if things don't go her way. Like, because in the first 2 rounds of their fight, it didn't discourage Nunes when Shevchenko hit her. It didn't get her off her game plan. No, right?
She sticks to it. It's she is her own worst enemy. Really, it's like her pouring out her gas tank. That is what hurts her. Other people, like nobody really has technically outdone her when she's fresh. She's a phenomenally well-rounded fighter. The whole thing here is when you're right about needing to see her do that, but there's a big difference in our Rumble Nunes comparison. Rumble still has gas left. Rumble breaks. Mm-hmm. And he breaks because it's a confidence thing. I don't think Nunes breaks because of a confidence thing. I just think she literally has nothing left in the tank. Yeah.
That is I think not quite the same thing.
The two can often be tied, right? Like, I think McGregor went through that in the first Diaz fight.
McGregor's a great example of how those two things get tied.
He felt himself get tired, and that broke him. Because he'd never experienced, like, the fight suddenly turning against him, and then realized at the same instant, oh my God, I'm exhausted. I have nothing to offer.
All I'm saying is Amanda Johnson is not Rumble, or Amanda Nunes is not Rumble turning his back like at the first sign of trouble and letting Daniel Cormier choke.
Certainly not. And I see now why.
To do something else.
Yeah, and I can see now why, like, in comparison to that kind of stuff, it definitely bears repeating that Nunes very craftily survived the third round against Shevchenko. It's not as if she just got finished. She survived.
If
she
that's
won the
Rumble,
fight.
Rumble is getting RNC'd within the first minute of that round.
Yes.
Like, or Conor McGregor, maybe he gets RNC'd within the first 2 minutes of the round, or maybe he manages to jab his way out and survive.
Yeah.
Like,
Nunes did exactly what she needed to do to win a fight when she was gassed. My question is that, like, Valentina Shevchenko is not Phil Davis. She's not giving Nunes these opportunities because, she's so timid she won't try anything. And indeed, in the third round of that fight, she got pretty mean. She knew she needed to start making headway and landed some pretty vicious shots. She had Nunes hurt.
She tried to soccer kick her in the second round, which was badass.
Yeah, she tried to soccer kick her after a weird little scramble that sent Nunes to her knees. She hit her with some nasty knees in the clinch in the third.
Great elbows, too.
Yeah, she was starting to pour it on to the best of her ability. So again, we're walking this weird line because...
What kills me about Shevchenko,
right,
is Nunes... There was a point, and Nunes actually did better toward the end of that round, did well to survive toward the end of the third. Like, she found a little bit of gas left to get to the point where she could kind of hold and not get murdered.
Right.
Like, Shevchenko, despite having her like basically dead on the feet, Shevchenko still could barely muster up the volume.
Yeah.
She couldn't muster up the volume to 10-8 her in the third round.
Yeah.
Like, that because she still produced so little offense. Like, for anybody else, they at least find a way to 10-8 her in that, and Shevchenko still couldn't. Like, that's I mean, I love Shevchenko's skills, and I really enjoy her game because it's smart and it's put together at such a high level, and it shows it's so dependent on her experience that you can see the wheels turning in her head. You can see the reactions. You can see what a well-crafted, well-tuned machine she is. And I'm so deeply frustrated when she doesn't do more.
Right.
Like, she managed to mostly give away the first two rounds against Juliana Pena. Like, that's wild, man.
Right. That's why, I mean, I'm really happy to see her in 5-round fights. I think probably the best thing she's done in MMA was her victory over Holly Holm. Just a consummate, effortless win that got better and better down the stretch. And her other big moments, like submitting Pena after a rough start and doing really well against Nunes after a rough start, it's frustrating. But if I imagine this fight as some sort of repeat of the first, and we can certainly determine whether or not that's a mistake to assume that it'll be the same, then I just can't help but ask myself, what about those extra 2 rounds? What did Nunes show me in that third that lets me believe that even though she's obviously tired, she can do anything but get beaten up? Even at a gradual pace, she was still definitely getting beaten up.
Yeah. And we know Shevchenko's not going to gas. Shevchenko has been, A, she's got no track record of it, and B, she's been training at altitude. She's been training in Colorado for a while.
And
like, she's going to come in awesome shape. If she could push the pace, then I think it would be a given. But if this somehow stays on the feet, if Nunes doesn't waste energy with poorly set up shots, if she just sticks on the feet, throws kicks, throws some combinations, doesn't give Shevchenko a whole lot to work with, because again, there's a 3-inch height advantage for Nunes here, and I think an even longer one in reach.
Yeah.
So it's not easy for Shevchenko is going to have way more trouble finding the counters that she found so easily against Nunes, and you could see that in the first 2 rounds of their last fight when they were on the feet. Shevchenko did not get much going when Nunes was not tired.
I mean, that's probably why she had such a hard time getting it going in the third, too, because she wasn't really landing any counters in the fight. She had to lead to hit Amanda Nunes. I think it would be really smart of her to come out and kind of create a firefight in the first round if she has to put some pressure on and make Nunes tense up and make her swing hard on a few openings, on a few feints. Give her some pressure to react to, but I don't think she'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's going to trust that Nunes is going to gas herself out. But also,
right.
I don't think you're wrong. But this is one of those things where we could weigh the calculated risk. And I think you're right. I think that would be smart to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in Shevchenko's mind, it's just way easier to play your own game and not try to get out of your game than it is to try to deviate from that.
Yeah, she's too tactical. Like she's not going to do something that is maybe a bit of a risk because it will help her later in the fight. She is just going to figure out every single opening that is presented to her as it's presented. And that is there. Yeah, that's the difficulty. We're both seeing the same things in this fight. Shevchenko will be very grateful if Nunes gasses, and Nunes will be extremely dangerous up to and until that happens. And what happens outside of that is really difficult to say. Because it's kind of a tale of two fights.
I always come off as such a Shevchenko hater, and I never mean to. Like, that's never my intention. And it always sounds like I have some huge problem with Valentina Shevchenko. Like,
I don't want to give you the vibe that I hate Amanda Nunes either. Like, I think,
we have the same freaking problem every time we discuss one of these two fighters.
Yeah, I think we probably do, because we both have these, persistent frustrations with them, like things we want to see them overcome that for us in particular, for whatever reason, it just kind of niggles at us. It just kind of, there's always this worrying little fear when Nunes fights, like, is she going to gas again? And when you watch Shevchenko, it's like, is she going to make anything happen?
They're both so deeply exactly our kind of fighters. I think that's I love Nunes' athleticism. I love her speed. I love that subtle little footwork she uses in the pocket. Like, I love aggressive counterpunching as a game. Like, that is my favorite style of fighter to watch.
And I love, frequently frustrating technicians, master technicians who sometimes are, too focused in on what they do well to really be a perfect version of themselves. Those are a lot of my favorite fighters.
And I think I think when we discuss Nunes and Shevchenko, because if I recall correctly, we argued about this after. Yeah. We argued about this before they fought the first time, and I think we argued about it after they fought that time.
Our inner fanboys come out with these two ladies for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, who would have thought that of all the potential women's bantamweight title fights, like, this would be the one that you and I really got after each other.
I mean, it's not even like either of them are really my favorite fighters either. Like,
no,
there's certainly fighters, like I said, like Romero Whittaker's the big fight for me this weekend. But, I guess it's time for that final prediction. The most important part of this whole half-hour breakdown we've just given. I think people can probably tell what our predictions are going to be. I don't want to be a bandwagoner and say, Nunes this, Nunes that. I know exactly what's going to happen. Leaving window wide open for all of the things that Pat suggested. I think all those are very likely. I do think that we'll get something relatively similar to the first fight, and I like Shevchenko to get a TKO in the 4th or 5th.
I think Nunes is going to get her down, and this time I think Nunes is not going to. I don't think Shevchenko gets off the hook this time. I like Nunes by either a ground and pound TKO in the second round, or or more likely probably a rear naked choke.
Sure, and we can both very clearly see how both of those out. I mean, those are kind of like late win or decision for Shevchenko, early finish for Nunes. And there are various other things that can happen, but those are basically the two reasonable expectations.
The only things that would really surprise me would be an early Shevchenko knockout.
Yes.
Or I would be surprised if she submitted her early too, like an early Shevchenko finish, or Nunes. I think the least likely outcome is like Nunes TKO 5.
Yeah. Early for Shevchenko or late for Nunes are both just as unlikely as early for Nunes and late for Shevchenko are likely. So. Yeah. It should be a compelling fight. I'm looking forward to it, and we hope that our argumentation over it got you all hyped up.
Real quick, I have one more question for you.
Uh-huh.
Do you miss Ronda Rousey?
No.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I kind of feel bad that I don't. I was thinking about that recently, actually, but I really don't.
Yeah. This is like I realize this is kind of a sidebar here, but I was writing about this in my Washington Post article about this fight and thinking like, I don't miss Ronda Rousey as a fighter at all. I miss that she used to bring some juice to the events, and maybe that some other folks got that shine.
Yeah,
it felt like a big deal when Ronda Rousey was fighting, but I feel like this division is still super exciting. It's
feels
really fun. They're good fighters here.
It feels, and maybe it's just because Ronda is no longer at the top, but it feels more like the division has arrived as like a fully fledged MMA division. Like Ronda Rousey, this kind of stuff that Ronda Rousey did to people, that's probably never going to be done in this division again. It was just a weird moment in time. Whereas like Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko, as a stylistic matchup with the skill sets of both fighters, the questions we're asking about it, the fact that we spent like 35 minutes breaking it down, it feels like a real title fight. It doesn't feel like a bizarre spectacle, and that's kind of always the flavor I got from Rousey's fights. I don't know if that's fair, but...
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It reminds me a lot of the lightweight division post-BJ Penn.
Yeah.
That you had this one fighter who rode it from its inception, from its re-inception in the UFC, all the way to the point where suddenly we were like, holy shit, there are tons of really fun lightweights out there.
Yeah.
And, you know, Frankie did everything he could to hang on to the title, but if Frankie hadn't been quite Frankie, he would have been done in his first title defense, you know, and we would have had, I think, the kind of turnover that we have had since then.
Yeah, and Nunes came a couple fights later than Frankie did, but she may be the Frankie of this division. Like, she really has announced herself as the top contender for, you know, dominant champion.
Yeah, and because she's something so noticeable, like she's so much more noticeably complete than Rousey is.
Yeah, you look at Nunes, you know, she does have a glaring weakness, but it feels more like a stylistic thing. Like it's not like, you know what I mean? It's not so weird and so idiosyncratic as Ronda Rousey's weaknesses are.
Yeah, well, like you put Nunes or Shevchenko too in any division in the UFC, and their skill on a skill basis. Like if you were to make a roughly equivalent male fighter who's a heavyweight who fought the way that Amanda Nunes does with her caliber of physical gifts relative to competition, that's a potential championship caliber fighter.
Yeah.
Like, or same deal with Valentina Shevchenko, like a slightly undersized but incredibly technical striker with lightning speed relative to everybody that she's fighting. Like that is a competitive championship level fighter in any division in the UFC.
But both would stand out in other divisions, but both would feel at home. Whereas Ronda Rousey, it was always just too weird of a phenomenon to fit into the landscape of any division.
And so in that sense, I mean, like I don't miss Rousey as a fighter at all. It feels very much like in a really rapid time frame, she became a thing of the past, like a relic of a bygone age. Yeah,
that's the way it goes, man. But Nunes Shevchenko is, I think, maybe the beginning of a new era, fun series between top fighters in an increasingly interesting women's bantamweight division. So let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we are going to get to that heavyweight rubber match between MMA legends Fabricio Verdum and Alistair Overeem after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back after a legendary 40-minute segment. We now move on to these two fighters who I've already described, I think, at least 3 times separately as legendary themselves. Fabricio Verdum, Alistair Overeem. What I am hoping for from this fight, Pat, is that it will be weird. Like, I think these two generally match up well. I think both of their 2 fights they've had already, one in, I think, 2006, one in 2011. They've both been pretty good fights. The second one was very compelling, but also for especially Verdum fans, very frustrating.
Marred by the butt scooting. Yeah, so what people probably remember about that fight is the butt scooting. What they don't remember is that if he hadn't done that,
right,
Verdum had a pretty good case for winning the fight because Overeem did not produce much offense, if any.
Right. Yeah, but Verdum shot himself in the foot. I mean, he really made it hard to give him the rounds. Even, like, you could still make a case that he won that fight if you were scoring output and damage.
It looked fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, it looked bad.
And he was so eager to flop that, like, Overeem would land a big knee and Verdum would fall. And how can you blame a judge for not being able to tell, like, was he hurt? Or is he just doing this. The really frustrating thing, and I want to get at the cause for why I think that matchup played out the way it did, and that should give us some insight into, this rubber match between them, is that I think both Overeem and Verdum are kind of bullies. I think that Verdum, for his entire career, has been more the kind of bully that Overeem is now. Like, he's kind of like the snide class clown who trolls you and makes faces, and he likes to, like, make you think you're doing well and set a trap. And I think he seems to enjoy catching people. Almost, he enjoys the humiliation of the other person as much as he enjoys winning the fight. I think he gets a kick out of that. And you can see that in little things. We've talked about Verdum's killer instinct, but, like, there are a lot of fighters who would not have reacted to Edmund Taverdian screaming in their face by front kicking him across the octagon and squaring up. Like, that's very much a Verdum kind of a bullyish reaction. And what I think he experienced in that second fight was the sudden realization that he was not physically comparable to Alistair Overeem. And so even though he enjoyed a lot of success with just being quick and accurate and throwing volume, he was so concerned about getting hit by Overeem that every time Overeem's confidence began to flag, every time that little Overeem wrinkle started to appear in his psyche, Verdum would flop or withdraw and allow Overeem to build his confidence right back up. And
so I can give you a little insight into that.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much that, though he was shocked by how strong Overeem was. It wasn't so much how hard Overeem hit. Like, Fabricio has never had anything but confidence in his chin.
I thought it was more strength in the clinch. Like, he tied up with Overeem and felt his power and was like,
So that was because the clinch, it's kind of hard for us to remember now, but 2011 Verdum was not a well thought of striker.
Yeah.
At all. Like, he's turned into a pretty dang functionally sound striker over the last few years. But his coming out party as a striker was the Roy Nelson fight, which was the fight after that. And at this point, people were not high on Verdum as a striker, and Verdum didn't have a lot of confidence in himself as a striker. Mm-hmm. He had a lot of confidence, probably more confidence than he should have had in his clinch game. And when he walked into the clinch and could not move Overeem, literally could not budge him at all, that was a huge blow to his confidence.
Right. And then it was downhill. He started flopping. He started thinking, well, I submitted him last time. I need to get into the ground. That's not a good idea against Overeem anyway. Like, Verdum's the only guy to submit Overeem. Banking on it happening again is not necessarily smart. Overeem's a good grappler, especially if you're giving him top position. He's not easy to catch there. And
it stands out as the dumbest strategic performance of Verdum's career. Because everything went wrong for him. He still barely lost the fight, but Cordero told him, if you ever ignore my instructions again, I'm not cornering you.
Yeah.
So
what happened is because of all the flopping, the one more point I wanted to make is that he also exhausted himself. When he could have been fresh going into round 3 or pretty lively against an Overeem who was, a muscular freak and was starting to slow down, he exhausted himself just from falling down and having to stand up over and over. And then I believe he also injured his knee being thrown to the ground almost willingly by Overeem. So he really, he shot himself. He found about a dozen different ways to shoot himself in the foot with the way he approached that fight. So my question is, and this is what I think makes this fight really compelling, is that obviously Overeem is not that Overeem anymore. But does the new, more Verdum-esque style of bully Overeem frustrate Verdum in a different way, or without his immense physical advantages and having learned a lesson from the past and gained more confidence in his striking, can Verdum just forge ahead and beat him up?
So I have to disagree with your characterization of Verdum as a bully a little bit.
All right.
I think it was true of the 2011 version of Verdum. I think he was more psychologically fragile. I think this version of Verdum is not the kind of guy you can break like that. I think you can bait him into doing reckless things, but that's not the same thing as having the kind of bully mentality where if you're not having enormous success, you're kind of breaking.
I agree.
So the best example of that to me of kind of how much Verdum's mindset has evolved is that Velasquez fight, where Verdum was happy to put himself in 50-50 exchanges where it was not immediately obvious that those were going to turn out well for him. And he was happy to do that, thinking that strategically it was going to win him the fight. Like, to me, that is, while that was a risky fight for him, he played that exactly the way that he needed to win it. Like, it was, I thought it was kind of a brilliant strategic performance.
Right.
and one in a string of kind of brilliant strategic performances from Verdum. The first Travis Browne fight was also a kind of a strategic masterpiece. Mm-hmm. And he is a bully, or he's a confident fighter. I think that there's a thin line between a confident fighter and a bully, and Verdum for much of his career has straddled that line. And I think he's now on the confident side of that, where like if he sees that he's having success, he's just going to build and pick up momentum as the fight goes on.
Yeah. So I think the key difference for me between these two guys, like if we're talking about their mindsets, which are similar in some ways and different in others, the big difference is that when things stop going Overeem's way, he collapses. He really falls apart. Again, like you could hearken that to somebody like Anthony Johnson. Although with Overeem, I think he has maybe more of an excuse because at least he knows that he has a fragile chin. Like he's easy to hurt, and I think that haunts him a bit. Verdum, if he's not given the fight he wants, can become frustrated or overzealous and just do things that are stupid. Overeem's not going to put himself in harm's way to a fault, whereas Verdum will put himself in harm's way to a fault. They both have different reactions to not getting what they want out of the first few minutes of a fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the best evidence of that for Verdum is the Miocic fight, where he kind of thought that he had him hurt, or he was a little frustrated, and he's like, okay, well, I'll just keep pressuring him. I'll keep going after him. Like, now the irony of that to me is that would have worked just fine against Alistair Overeem. Had Overeem reacted that way and Verdum had gone after him, Overeem would have fucking run, and Verdum probably would have head kicked him as he tried to run off the fence with his back turned.
Yeah,
like that, and that to me is exactly the dynamic of this fight. Like, I think that Overeem is probably, unless he knocks out Verdum in the opening 3 minutes of the fight, when Verdum comes face first in and Overeem finds like a counterpunch, unless that happens, I think Overeem is going to get frustrated because Verdum is going to just hit him back, and Verdum's tough and he's durable and he's not easy to knock out. Like, if Overeem is not clearly in control of that fight, if he's getting touched up, if he's eating a shot here and a shot there, if they get into the clinch, where Overeem now seems to have lost much of what once made him special there, if they get into the clinch, I don't think it's a given that Verdum has problems with that. Cardio-wise, there's no question in my mind that Verdum has much better cardio than Overeem at this point in his career, especially an Overeem who's not in control of the fight, or not obviously in control of the fight. Those are kind of key dynamics here, and I feel like mindset-wise, if you're obviously stronger mentally than Overeem, if you want to be in there, and I think Verdum still does, that's going to give you some territory to work with against him.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have some questions about how much what Verdum does as a striker is based on confidence, and how much that tends to override, like, the fact that, like, Verdum's a terrible defensive fighter. He's pretty bad. He doesn't really move his head. He's very erratically anyway. When he throws, you can definitely hit him back. You're going to find his head exactly where you expect it to be.
Rewatch the second and third rounds of the Browne fight, man. He was moving the second Browne fight. He was doing a good job of moving his head. He was rolling under shots. He was slipping off the center line.
He also had a super obvious opponent in front of him. You know what I mean? Like, Travis Browne was loading up on the silliest shit. Throw in like these big uppercuts from far away. I think that Overeem is
in their first fight, not in the second one. In the second one, Browne was throwing meat and potatoes, straight kicks down or straight punches down the pipe. Like,
yeah, but they weren't set up, is what I'm saying. They were obvious because they were poorly done. Like, to me, in that fight, Browne looked very slow and very predictable. It was like the same right hand over and over again. I think it's easy to stand, if you're controlling distance, to stand in front of that version of Travis Browne and get out of the way. Overeem's got a lot more like direct, straight to the target speed than someone like Travis Browne, and is a more technical striker. Covers distance very surprisingly. Those kind of things give me pause here, because I know that Verdum can be caught, and I know that if a fight isn't going the way he wants, he can expose himself. And I also know that Overeem, will absolutely crumble if the fight really goes against him. But I don't know. I'm not confident that Verdum can force a really aggressive fight on Overeem without putting himself at too much risk of being caught. Like, I know.
Do you think Verdum cares about getting caught though?
Well, I mean, if he gets knocked out, it won't matter. You know what I mean? Like, I know that Overeem could knock him out with one shot.
But this is about confidence, right?
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
If, first of all, I am not sold that Overeem has the kind of power that he used to. I think the Arlovsky knockout doesn't tell us a whole lot. I think the Mark Hunt knockout against the guy who's just looked done in that fight and his fight before that. I'm not convinced that tells us that Overeem still has that kind of juice. And Verdum is still one of the toughest, may have the best chin over the long course of his career in the heavyweight division, may have the best chin ever.
Yeah, he was in his day extremely durable, and Miocic has a lot of power. We have had that point driven home by his last few performances. I don't know. I just have this weird feeling though about this fight. This isn't exactly like grade A analysis, but I just have this feeling. I think Overeem is still accurate and quick and certainly powerful enough to hurt a Verdum who runs into him. And I have this weird feeling that Verdum is kind of nearing the end. I think maybe his last hurrah, was that run to the title. And I think honestly, if Travis Brown had even looked like he did in the Derek Lewis fight, he would have given Verdum a much stiffer contest. So Brown was terrible in that fight. You know what I mean? Like Verdum kind of coasted his way through the last 10 minutes, just casually outstriking Travis Brown.
He wasn't casually outstriking him. He forced the kind of striking matchup that was really hard for Brown, which was a quick-paced one in the pocket. That is not Brown's kind of fight. Brown wants to be, this version of Brown at least wanted to be sitting at the end of his reach and didn't really know how to react. Yeah. Verdum knocked him down with a right hand. He beat the shit out of him. He landed 75 strikes, something like that. 80 strikes.
Very clearly beat him. But his really big moments were all first round. After that, it was I was like, what are you doing, Fabricio? I really felt like he could have beaten Travis Brown more decisively than he did after having a fantastic and ridiculous first round, leading with the flying side kick to the face. I don't know. I have a feeling that if he gets lulled into a slower pace like he did in that fight, that Overeem the new Overeem is going to be a lot better suited for that range than the one that Verdum has fought in the past. I think it may surprise him how different Overeem is in the cage. 2011 Overeem is a totally different fighter than the one we have now, except for the fact that both men get hurt easily and crumble,
See, where we disagree on this is because I'm not necessarily pointing to anything technical here. I have a hard time seeing from a mindset perspective, unless Verdum's chin is just done and Overeem catches him with a perfect punch probably relatively early on in the fight, I just feel like this is a fight where the current version of Overeem is made to crumble. Because if he hits Verdum with his Sunday best shot, and I think he probably will early in the fight, and Verdum doesn't go down from it, and Verdum just sticks around in the pocket and shakes it off and flips him the bird or does some other kind of Fabricio thing, then I don't think Overeem's confidence can recover from that.
Yeah,
I think this version of Overeem is so mentally fragile that, if they get into that situation, if Verdum turns it into a firefight in the pocket, forces Overeem to work at pace, forces him to work outside the distance where he's most comfortable, and is comfortable kicking with him at range too. I think that's going to be really, really hard for Overeem to deal with mentally for more than about 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah, there is a very good chance you're right. What I see happening is a somewhat measured start, as we've gotten in both of their previous 2 fights, and Overeem just being technically superior at that range, landing the things that count more, and whether or not that means that, my fear here is that, yes, Overeem having early success will cause Verdum to flip a switch, but my fear is that Verdum's switch is not particularly graceful all the time. I think he may start fighting stupidly, to put it simply. We're not to count on Alistair Overeem too much. I don't want to put a ton of faith in Alistair Overeem, but I think I have a pretty good knack for calling his fights and kind of reading what is going to cause him to fold and what won't. I suppose my screw up was the Miocic fight, but I did call him beating JDS. I feel pretty good about that one still.
Let me put it to you this way. Yeah. I've known Fabricio for a fair while. I haven't talked to him in a year or two, but if there's one thing that has always stood out about Verdum, it's that he just doesn't give a fuck. And Alistair Overeem has always struggled against guys who just don't give a fuck. And the version of Mark Hunt that he fought in his last fight clearly did. He clearly was not all there in the cage. He looked slow. He did not look like he wanted to go shot for shot with Overeem. And but everybody else who has come in and fought Alistair Overeem just fuck you. I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to try and come after you. I don't care if you hit me. I'm not scared of you. Everybody who has fought Overeem like that since he got off the juice, more or less, has beaten him handily. Yeah. And I think that Verdum is going to fight him like that. And I think if you fight Overeem like that, you are a massive favorite to win, because you don't have to take that many shots from Overeem. It's not like he's going to piece you up, Ioana Jędrzejczyk style. Like, no. You need to take probably 4 or 5 good shots from him. And if you can take 4 or 5 good shots from him without getting knocked out, then he's probably going to crumple. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a weird feeling he's going to knock Fabricio out, though. I can't I can't explain it too much beyond that. I just have a hunch about it. I just think that I don't know. I don't think Verdum is long for the heavyweight division, and I don't exactly know why that is. But I didn't love.
If he's not long for the heavyweight division, a 37-year-old Alistair Overeem with a bajillion fights on his record and how many knockout losses? Yeah. How is he long for the division?
But there's a difference between being the guy who knows he can get knocked out and always gets knocked out. Not that really bolsters Overeem's confidence, but he at least has a style built for that. And there's a difference between that and being a Chuck Liddell, whose style is built on not being knockoutable and then suddenly becoming fragile. And I have this fear that line may have been passed by Verdum, that he's maybe, or like Sam Stout. Like, there's a lot of guys with great chins in their primes, and then they just kind of go away very suddenly. And I have a fear that's the case with Verdum. Although, who knows? Because he took a few good shots late in the Brown fight and was okay. So who knows?
He seemed fine. Like, I think if you're looking at the grand context of somebody's career, running into getting knocked out by one good shot and that not happening for there's a difference between an aberration and an emerging pattern. Yeah. And one of the things that we overdo in MMA is declare a pattern before it really exists. And like calling knockouts on the basis of his chin is faded or it's not faded, for the most part, I think is the definition of overreading a pattern.
Yeah,
because
I think you're right.
It's because it's a probability thing, right? Like, the chances of any single shot being a knockout shot are, even on a guy whose chin is tissue paper, is still pretty low. At most, you're talking about maybe 1 in every 10 or 15 headshots against somebody with a power puncher, against somebody with the worst chin possible. You're still looking at that proportion. Yeah. So think about that. You're rolling the dice every single time that happens. What's the aggregate probability of that? Somebody with a tissue paper chin can go into a fight, get hit a whole bunch of times by a power puncher, and still make it out to the end. It's just not a given. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I'm with you. I think that logically you're probably right, and I do expect you to rub it in if and when Verdum gets the win, and probably pastes Overeem. But you can better believe I'll bring it up if Overeem gets that one lucky shot that I suspect.
We're going to talk about it next weekend.
Yeah, we will.
We're going to talk about it next week. We're going to have a lot to discuss.
Yes, we will. Yeah, a lot of important stuff happening here. Let's go ahead and wrap this segment up. And when we come back, we have one more short segment for you. We're going to talk about Curtis Blaydes, top heavyweight prospect, one of the most promising men at 265 in a long time, second only to Francis Ngannou, who beat him in his UFC debut. He's taking on established heavyweight vet Daniel Omielanchuk on the main card, middle portion of this main card. We're going to talk about Blaydes, his potential, how we see that fight playing out, and what we hope to see from him in the future. And then we're also going to spend just a couple minutes giving our thoughts on Mark Diakiese, lightweight fighter, who's fighting Drakkar Klose on the main card of the TUF 24 finale. It is TUF 24, is it? Is it 25?
TUF 25.
I think I've been calling it TUF 24 for weeks. TUF 25 finale. Boy, these numbers, they really stick in your brain, huh? That's a great naming convention. It's just to give everything an arbitrary number.
It worked when it was like 7 or 8 or 9. Yes. And now we're into the fucking 20s. Who cares?
Yeah, right. So we'll talk about those two guys after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, let's start things off, Pat. Let's talk about Marc Diakiese first. Diakiese's taking on Drakkar Klose. Klose? I can't remember how his name is pronounced. Who won his UFC debut over Devin Powell, a guy who is scrappy and not much else. How do you see the fight playing out, and what are your thoughts on Marc Diakiese as a prospect?
So I've had my eye on Diakiese for a long time. So he debuted back in 2013. I think the first time I watched him was late 2014 or early 2015. I've thought that he had a lot of potential for a really long time.
Yeah.
Fantastic athlete. Like pretty solid wrestling skills coming up on the British scene. The striking was kind of a surprise when he got into the UFC, how good he was at striking, because that was not really his bread and butter on the regionals. His bread and butter on the regionals was really his takedown game.
Yeah, it was like just before his UFC debut, he knocked two dudes out.
Yeah,
but that was
and before that he had mostly been kind of a like slam to top control guy.
Yeah,
but you could see the physicality, you could see kind of the timing and the instincts. You could see the killer instinct. He had great killer instinct. Mm-hmm. But he had gotten a lot of cage time. He seemed to be well trained. There was a lot to like. And so far, he's blossoming the way that you would expect from a guy like that. He's putting together his striking better. He's showing off some counterpunching skills. I think he's maybe a little too willing to try crazy shit. Like he hasn't been punished really for that yet. But they're taking it slow with him too. Like he has not been getting huge steps up in competition, right? Like this is going to be his fourth UFC fight, and he's fighting Klose, who's on his second UFC fight.
Yeah, and that is almost like a thorn in our sides as analysts, because it's almost difficult to look at the matchups Diakiese has had so far and read a lot into them, because they're basically finding out by very small gradations, like, okay, can you utterly destroy this guy? Okay, check. How about this slightly better guy? And so it's not like we get to see him really facing a ton of prolonged adversity. That being said, Łukasz Sajewski gave him a pretty good scrap in his UFC debut, and we have seen things from Diakiese to suggest that, we know he's not a perfect fighter. He's maybe a little too reliant on athleticism and maybe a little too bold, is how I would say it. He's a very audacious young fighter who will just do anything. He seems to be able to go for days. He's got tremendous physical strength. He's very explosive, very agile. And if he sees an opportunity, he will go for it. Whether it is 13 lift slams in a row, no matter how much energy it seems to waste, he'll go for it. And I have to imagine he's going to be taught a lesson by that habit at some point. But so far, he has persevered through any rough spots that arise and just kept going and won. So is Drakkar Klose the guy to really make him pay for those habits?
I think he could make him pay if Diakiese burns too much energy early. Mm-hmm. I think that's I think what we saw from Klose against Powell was that he's relentless. He's a grinder.
Yeah.
He's not at all an unskilled fighter. And he's a pretty functional wrestler and clinch guy. That's really what stood out about that. So if Diakiese gets sucked into that kind of grinding fight, then Klose's gas tank is probably going to be better. I think he can probably do that for longer. And so that means Diakiese – that doesn't mean Diakiese can't win that kind of fight. I think it's entirely possible. It turns out Diakise's gas tank is just actually limitless.
Yeah,
and he can just slam you for 15 minutes and screw you up.
He clearly gets tired, but he's one of those guys that it doesn't seem to ever bother him.
Yeah, his work rate doesn't drop, right? Yeah. This is something we've talked about a fair bit on this show is don't get sucked in by appearances. Look at what fighters do, not necessarily how they look.
Which there to me is that's a pretty significant boon for someone like Diakiese going forward. It's just that he's already learned relatively early in his career what it feels like to be dead tired and how to persevere and just keep fighting consistently through that. So I don't have any fears that he's going to gas and fall apart, but the way he throws himself into risky positions, there's a possibility of a violent response or a sudden submission really catching him off guard. I think more so than there is somebody easily outworking him because he gets tired.
Yeah, which I think means that Klose is not really the guy that we have to worry about in that regard.
That's my feeling.
I think because my guess is Diakiese could lose a round getting like shoved up against the fence and kind of worked over with knees and elbows and still find something spectacular in the second to pull it out. Like, I don't think Klose is that dynamic.
Yeah.
You know, I think he profiles as a grinder against all but the lowest level competition.
Yeah, and he does have 4 finishes to his name, but all TKO parentheses punches, which basically suggests he's holding you down or against the fence, and he forces the referee to stop in. He's not out there wrecking people with big dynamic slams and knockout punches the way Diakiese is.
Yeah, he's just not that kind of dynamic fighter. He's a little slower. He's real strong and he's real scrappy, and he'll stay in your face. He's not a bad wrestler. He's a nasty inside fighter, but that's really his game. And I can see, and he does a good job of sticking on you too. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, I don't think Klose is a bad fighter at all. I think he's going to stick around the UFC, and I think given a couple of years, he could turn into, like, if he develops right, like a fringy top 15 guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not. I don't think he has Diakise's kind of potential.
Right.
So, and in this kind of fight, if he gives Diakiese anything, Diakiese can finish him. So, I mean, you know, I don't know. It's tough. Like, I could see Klose just dragging Diakiese into his kind of fight and winning 2 out of 3 rounds and overcoming some big moments to just have done more. But I think that's what this is supposed to be. If we're looking at this from a matchmaking perspective, it's, can Diakiese deal with somebody who's just going to be relentless and tough and in his face and trying to knee and elbow him and make it nasty? Can Diakiese deal with that? I think you and I both think he can pass that test.
Yeah, I mean, I think he will probably, as he usually tends to, meet that relentless attitude head on. I think he'll end up in some ugly positions and take a few unnecessary shots early as he just is meeting force with force against a determined in-fighter. But there's just Klose is not like an ultimate shutdown fighter. Even Devin Powell found space to land some really nasty elbows when he did have him in the clinch. And you give those little openings, those little moments where he's like resting or just holding you in place. I don't think Diakiese consents to that kind of position. And I think that when he does capitalize on a little opening, he not only does so with much more, violent consequences, but it's a sort of a snowball effect. When something works for him, he just pours it on. He chains things together really naturally and really, really aggressively. So I think that Klose will give him a relatively close fight, a closer fight, if you will, and that ultimately Diakiese will just find an opening, start pouring on the offense, grinding, and we'll get another finish. I think we're going to start to see more knockouts from Diakiese as he continues to develop.
Yeah, he is really, really, really talented. And he really seems to be a guy who is well-trained and well-schooled. Mm-hmm. Like, it's really easy with a guy like Diakiese to look at him and see the physical talent, which is obviously there. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you and say that Diakiese isn't incredibly physically talented.
Right.
He is. But there's craft to his game, and there's style, and there's a lot going on there, I think, beyond just the physicality.
Sure. I agree.
So,
final words then will be given to Curtis Blades. As I said before, he's taken on Daniel Omielanchuk. Both of us were picking Diakiese in that fight, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. Then let's move on. Curtis Blades, heavyweight prospect. What is he, 24, 25 years old? 26. Even so, a baby by heavyweight standards. Younger, significantly younger even than Francis Ngannou, the guy who beat him. I think that Blades is a fighter that, if all goes according to plan, and because the heavyweight division is so clearly striated, that prospects really stand out. I think it's almost a certainty, as certain as a guess like this could be, that we will see Ngannou Blades 2 for the heavyweight title someday. I think that is coming down the line. These are just the two top up-and-comers in the division right now, very clearly.
Yeah, it's real weird, like, that the division is thin enough that you can pick that out, but I think that's pretty absolutely the case here.
Yeah.
And Blades, after losing to Ngannou, got his stuff together, and he traveled off to Colorado, where he was working with Dwayne Ludwig, and he was working with all the guys there. Like, he's a smart, well put together guy. He's real sharp. He got screwed because he tested just over the limit for weed in his last fight and got popped and had it turned into a no contest. It's just bullshit. I think everybody knows our feelings on this at this point.
Yep. The dangerous PED known as cannabis must be stopped. And obviously Curtis Blades should have lost an impressive dominant win because of like 3 too many metabolites in his bloodstream.
Yeah, I mean, he beat the shit out of Adam Milstead.
Oh my God.
Like, really, really dominated him. And Milstead's a talented heavyweight prospect too.
Yeah.
Like, Milstead was not nothing like that.
He did to Milstead something that Gaethje does that I like really well, except that Gaethje's like, for Gaethje, this happens as just a random occurrence in the midst of a whirlwind of violence, where it was very clearly a big part of Blades' approach. He would get Milstead against the fence, get him down, get him like to a 4 points type of position or something, and make him bear his weight as he was struggling back to his feet. And then as soon as Milstead was just about to straighten out his legs and stand up, Blades would just follow his momentum and like back to belly suplex him back to the ground. He would just make him stand up, make him work hard doing it, and then return him to the ground because he tried so hard to stand up. It was brutal and relentless and not something most heavyweights are doing right now.
Yeah, it was. That's not like, I mean, that's wrestling. That's pretty meat and potatoes kind of wrestling, but it's not a kind of wrestling that we see a ton of in MMA.
Yeah. And you add to the fact... Go on, sorry.
No, that was it.
Well, I mean, you add to that the fact that Blades is also the kind of wrestler we're maybe more used to in MMA. He has that close game and the mat return game that makes him as exhausting as someone like a Khabib Nurmagomedov, but he's also got a hell of a shot. You know, like he's a very good takedown artist from long distance. He can hit you with a blast double that will change your life. So,
and puts it together nicely with his strikes too. Like, you can tell he's a guy who, like, despite how he was a junior college wrestler, I think he was a junior college national champion. Am I making that up?
I think you're right.
So, despite having that background, he fights like an MMA natural. He fights like somebody who has been well trained from day one in how to put the various pieces together. He's got a great leg kicking game that I really like. Nice jab, nice leg kicks. He's not like a throw punches brawler who also wrestles. Like, his game is put together logically, and I think that's going to serve him well later on. Like, that was striking too when he fought Francis Ngannou. Like, you could see these are two guys who know MMA. They're not just like physically talented guys. They have good instincts. They've been well taught, and then they combine that with real physical gifts.
Yeah, the bones of a really complete MMA game were there even before Blades came to the UFC. Which, again, is a testament to how much potential he has. Because you could see him, I think in his fight with like Luis Cortez, his last fight before he came to the UFC and RFA, really nice jabs, feinting to set up his shots, controlling distance, closing distance, letting his opponent close distance. He had a feel for how to go from striking to wrestling and vice versa. And this was apparently at the time I know he was like traveling around and being a sparring partner for some pretty solid heavyweights and trying to learn as much as he could, but he was also, his home base was a UFC gym in Chicago. Like, we didn't really have a training regimen. Now that he's at elevation, I think we are really seeing that whole game blossom to to its fullest potential. The question here then is that, you know, we've talked very highly about Curtis Blades. What are the existing holes in his style, and how can somebody like Daniel Omielanchuk possibly attack them?
Well, so it's going to be depth of his striking game is the big one.
Right.
I think the building blocks are there for Blades to turn into a really good striker, to win fights entirely on the feet, leaving aside his wrestling game. The building blocks are there for that. But if he gets sucked into that kind of fight right now, I think if he can't find takedowns, then he's a little too hittable, because that's, you know, he's been striking for like 3.5 years, you know, 4 years. You haven't picked up everything you need to know defensively in that period of time. I think that's the big one. And Omielanchuk is the kind of guy who could exploit that. But Omielanchuk does not have the kind of necessary takedown defense to turn it into that kind of fight, I don't think.
Yeah.
He does have a nice clinch game. If Blades gets stuck in the clinch with him, Omielanczuk could really make him work. He could land good knees to the body. He could wear him down. But I don't think Omielanczuk can keep it in the clinch without giving up takedowns.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think Omielanczuk, obviously, he was controlled and beaten up on the ground by Anthony Hamilton, who is as powerful as Curtis Blades probably, but not nearly as well-rounded or skilled in any phase. But Omielanczuk is pretty crafty in the clinch. So if Blades does stall out at some point against the fence, like he landed some nasty elbows in his fight with Jarvis Donho, which was really not going his way at the beginning. He's had a few moments in the Oleinik fight as well. Omielanczuk has had moments where he has really hurt people and surprised them with short shots in the clinch. The big thing here for me, though, is I think that Blades is going to be able to get him down. I don't think he'll spend more time in the clinch than he needs to. I think he's got a really diverse, well put together takedown game that should allow him to overcome most of those problems. I wonder, however, if this could be the fight in which Curtis Blades realizes that he needs to pace himself. Because while he didn't seem to slow down to any significant degree in that Adam Milstead fight, he was also working at a breakneck pace. And likewise in the fight before that with Cody East. Whether striking or wrestling, he is just... It's like a Khabib Nurmagomedov approach, where it's like it'll work perfectly as long as you always make sure the other guy's more tired than you. Mm-hmm. But if Omielanczuk kind of plays the veteran, survives in the clinch, it doesn't work too hard, will those striking advantages he has, those tricky clinch skills, become real problems in the third if Blades slows down? It could.
Yeah, that's and I think that's what we're supposed to find out here.
I agree.
I think this is really good matchmaking. This is the kind of fight a guy like Curtis Blades needs to determine where he's at. Because, Blades trains at altitude. He was a well-conditioned guy even beforehand. Like, you could see that. He fought into the third round in his last fight before he came into the UFC. He was not tired by the time Francis Ngannou got the fight stopped due to a doctor stoppage. He wasn't really tired after 10 minutes of that, no. I don't think.
And he's tough as shit. He tried to cheat to stay in that fight, by the way. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, he tried to feel the doctor's fingers so he could tell him how many he was holding up because his eye was closed. So that tells you how gritty Curtis Blades is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really like Blades' game. I think that this is going to be a test that he passes with flying colors. I don't think we're going to see him run into an enormous amount of trouble in this division until he gets to somewhere around the top 8.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's an interesting matchup. Both, God knows, you and I have given enough praise to it, but I really cannot complain about the way that prospects like Blades are currently being matched in the UFC. I think Shelby and Maynard have really sharpened up the way fighters are developed. In the space of 6 months, we've seen much better matchmaking for up-and-comers, and I like that a lot. But I think that, again, I think Blades has enough potential that while this is a reasonable test and there are potential pitfalls for him, I think he's going to kind of run right through Omielanczuk. Just with his wrestling, his ground and pound, I think he's going to break him down pretty quickly. So,
yeah, that seems pretty likely to me.
Is that
about all we had for today?
Second round TKO, something like that. That's about it. Yeah, that's it. So let's wrap it up, I guess. Oh, is that all we have? We say after an hour and 20 minutes or
Jesus
so.
Christ, did we really go that long?
Yeah, that first segment was a real killer, but it was a good one. It was a good one, and I hope that people appreciate that we allow episodes to go over the usual 1 hour and 5, 1 hour and 10, if the fights are worth it. And I think these fights definitely were. I have a lot of high expectations for these two events this weekend. I'm really looking forward to watching them both. And let's tell the people listening what we've got coming out this week besides Heavy Hands stuff. Can you tell I'm a professional podcast host, Pat?
I can tell that.
Please save me. Tell them what you're working on.
So I've got 2 things coming out. I've got a technical analysis on for the Washington Post of Shevchenko Nunes. That's probably coming out Friday. And then I will have kind of an advanced piece about the middleweight title fight between Whitaker and Romero coming out on Deadspin. I don't know, probably Thursday would be my guess. But basically, does anybody miss Michael Bisping? And my answer to that is no. I don't think anybody really at this point misses Michael Bisping. Like, who gives a shit if he's not defending his title? If we get Romero Whittaker instead, and we get the winner of this fight against Gegard Mousasi, and then maybe we get the winner of that fight against like Luke Rockhold when he comes back, or Jacare if he can put a win or two together. Like, why miss Michael Bisping? Like, why focus on him if we've got all of this goodness happening down below?
We're getting a 5-round fight for a belt between the two best guys in the division. So
the belt.
The belt. Yeah, the belt. And the only one that really matters is currently the interim belt. So I'm fine with it, with Michael Bisping just vanishing. I don't care.
Yeah, that's about all I got. I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff for the new history show, which will be dropping Thursday, July 20th. So mark your calendars. 2 weeks.
Cool.
2 weeks.
I just did as for me, I just did an hour-long interview with Jim Miller, who is just the best. Was a pleasure to talk to. Very introspective, soft-spoken, intelligent guy. Not necessarily the personality and affect you would expect from a renowned action fighter, but he was a pleasure to talk to. Had a lot of interesting things to say. You can find that when this episode goes out as Patreon exclusive content. You can listen to the whole interview. It's like an hour and 10 minutes long or something like that. And then snippets from that are going to be used for a piece I have coming out this week. Here's the title I'm thinking of, Pat. I'm hoping this will be the first in a series of articles about, journeymen who deserve more respect. I'm thinking of calling this first installment The Middle. Jim Miller still wants to leave his mark on MMA. What do you think?
Oh, look at you. I like it.
So it's going to be, I think, a combo, sort of a marriage between like an interview piece looking at somebody's mindset, why they fight, what they care about, and also a bit of a technical breakdown, and trying to marry those two together. Interview, breakdown, smash together. And that's all I really got in the docket right now. That's what I'm really focusing on. So look for that to come out midweek, and check us out on Patreon for the full audio of that interview, as well as many other bonus episodes we do every month. It really is worth the measly $3 that you give us. That being said, we do appreciate every single one of our patrons. We love you guys, and we hope to keep growing the group as time goes on. I'm really flagging here at the end. An hour and 20. It's a hot day. The AC unit's off. Let's wrap this.
Call it Connor.
Wrap this son of a bitch up. Find us on social media. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter. I am at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. That's it. If you came here for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Jesus. I'm not good at this anymore.
It's fine, dude. It's fine.